Hi, this is Amber Young,
And this is Barbara Phillips.
and this is
Let's Talk EVM.
Welcome to our podcast. We'd like to get started with our disclaimer, and the disclaimer is said for myself and Barbara,
Yes.
and that is that all of the views that are expressed here are our own, and they are not the views of the United States government. All right. With that, we want to kick off we hope, short podcast with no guest. It's just me and Barbara this time, and also no soapbox moment. But I'll let Barbara give a little intro into what we're doing.
Yeah, I've been clamoring to get this out already, Amber, because it's so exciting where we are. We are at the Jet Propulsion Lab here, NASA facility in Pasadena, California. We're here for the NASA EVM working group, IPM working group, and we've been listening to a plethora of amazing contributors to the field over the last day and a half, and we wanted to just take a few minutes here at our lunch break to tell you guys more specifically about a panel that the leader of the working group facilitated. And and Amber was a panelist, and so she knows it firsthand, and I listened to it, but we thought that a lot of it was worth sharing with our listeners. So we're going to do that. Did I get that right, Amber?
Yeah, perfect. All right. So with that, I'm going to start off and just give you the construct of the panel and how it was organized. And then Barbara will go through kind of her notes and her questions, and I'll talk about what I remember and said or heard, and we'll just kind of explain what went on during the panel. So to get started, we'll talk about the organization. The panel was on Guideline 6, scheduling, essentially. And it was broken up into, I believe, 6 themes. I have them here in front of me, but I'm just going to read them off. Each theme was around 10 to 15 minutes. The full panel was around 2 hours. And we actually went over a little, about 20 minutes. So at first I was kind of, I don't know if I'd say nervous, but I was shocked that it was going to be a 2-hour panel. I don't think I've ever been on a 2-hour panel. That's fairly long. But in the end, it was extremely fun. And I think we had a really great panelists, and I loved hearing and learning from each and every one of them. So it was a great panel. I really enjoyed it. I really am honored to have been on it. Okay, so what were the themes? Theme 1 was about foundations and interpretations, about establishing a common understanding of Guideline 6. The types of topics were around IMS purpose, executable plans, compliance versus usefulness, government versus industry expectations, traceability, planning maturity, and logic fidelity. So the basics around why do we have an integrated master schedule. Then theme 2, we opened it up to risk, uncertainty, and change. We were exploring realism, replanning, and schedule adaptability. Some of the topics we explored were replanning, OTB, OTS, schedule margin, recovery planning, baseline realism, forecasting volatility, uncertainty representation, and funding uncertainty. All right. Theme 3 was around data discipline and assurance, where we discussed schedule quality, evidence, and surveillance. The topics that we were talking through were audit finding traceability, evidence-based schedules, health indicators, software interoperability, compliance consistency. We did have some Q&As scattered throughout from the audience. And then theme 4, we went into tools, AI, and automation, near and dear to my heart, where we looked at modernizing the discussion on data and looking ahead. Some of the topics included AI-assisted scheduling, predictive analytics, digital engineering, agile integration, tool interoperability, and automation risks. Then we looked at... We have 2 more themes. We went to theme 6. I was just checking how many we have. So theme 5 was integration and stakeholder alignment, where we highlighted cross-functional schedule ownership. And the topics that we discussed were around engineering integration, finance alignment, suppliers, CAM engagement, executive behavior, subcontractor integration, and GFE, government furnished equipment dependencies. And then theme 6, the last theme was around behavioral and culture drivers, really going into For me, IP2 a meter and the environment, where we addressed organizational realities behind poor schedules. And the topics included management pressure, green schedule syndrome, quote unquote, trust erosion, optimism bias, culture versus compliance. All right. So those were the themes, and it was a really rich conversation. So with that, I'll take it to Barbara, and she'll start talking through her notes, and I'll jump in whenever something kind of strikes me.
Well, I think I was being a little squirrely earlier. John Fleming was our facilitator, and our panelists, along with Amber, were Michelle King, who works here at NASA with us. She's a scheduling lead for NASA as a policy wonk and makes a difference in that. We had Lisa Hastings, who works for General Atomics and is currently, is she vice chair? I think at IPM at IPMD, NDA, IPMD. We're excited to have her. She has, we've interviewed her on the podcast before. She has, and she and the other panelist to tell you about is Yancey Qualls, who, and the two of them do a really funny thing at IPMD about challenges in scheduling. So they were fun to have on the panel. Yancey is really an original thinker in the scheduling world. He's making jokes the whole time, wishing he had invented BEI. And then, of course, we have the great and wonderful Tom Polin, who is with Dell Tech, and he promoted the use of their tools, but that's his job. Anyway, so one of the first questions John asked everybody, Amber, was what have they found to be the most misunderstood scheduling term? And I feel like, correct me, but I feel like Michelle really stole the answer for that one. She was first, so she got to go first. But what was the difference between float and margin?
Sure.
And later here, day two, that very question came back up, and which to use, and how is it defined, and it's really quite unsolved. I'll just read. The other answers were that people erroneously just look at SPI in isolation without ticking and tying with what's going on in the schedule and the critical path. SVT, Yancey was Amber's contribution, but that is something Yancey and Lisa are still dogging. They told us repeatedly in the PASIG, in the NDIA guide on planning, scheduling, and excellence guide. That's what PASEG stands for. And then Tom said, is the plan a reflection, or is it something to drive execution? I mean, he was like, is it a pretty picture, or is it something that really, really spells or irons out how the order of things need to go? Did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to add on the first one, which with Michelle that stole the show, today, day two of the working group, like Barbara said, it came up about total float versus schedule margin. And another key point that was also made during that conversation was in the world of EV to really be clear on when you're talking about budget versus funds, and not be conflating the two. There tends to be a lot of habit to overuse the word funding, when we really in EVM space are talking budgets.
We could have a whole episode on that. Yeah. I think we probably will. Another question that John posed to his panelists was about the adequacy of the schedule. What's the right level of detail or fidelity that's needed? And of course, there is no one size fits all. Depends on the project. It's pretty. I think Amber, maybe not with the notes I took, but the pretty dramatic answer from the Department of Energy, because they have schedules that are 100,000 lines long because their projects are 20 plus years. We do not have that in my place of work. And so that sort of chaos. And Amber, do you want to talk to that?
I see Barbara's notes here, and in response, my response was that rather than looking at level of detail, it's about being able to extract informed decisions from the schedule. But some of the things that came up during the conversation and more towards the end of the panel were, what can you do what types of scheduling practices can you stop, change, or whatnot. And mine really centered around performance of the scheduling tools. When you get to such large volume of activities and with all the fields that are required and everything, the software tools just are not able to process that. And your performance is inhibited, and it starts to impede the ability to extract data to do any type of analysis. And so the idea of breaking them up is really critical. And there's different ways to do that mechanically. But essentially having sub projects with external ties that then link and makes it easier for performance. And I have many other additional ideas and arguments for that, but that's the crux of it.
I'm going to jump to Tom's answer, which I talked to him afterwards, and it actually directly tied to something Michelle said later as well. Tom's answer was about, it's right when it doesn't take more than, he just put a number like 2 hours to be able to tell your replacement PM what's going on the project. That it isn't a 5-day talk about, what's in the schedule, but it takes a couple of hours to say, hey, look, this is what's going on to your replacement. And I was reminded back in 2001 when I studied for my PMP, that was one of the first things. I was surprised how much I learned from the PMBOK, which is probably conceited of me, but anyway, one of the things I learned is that, when you write your project plan, the universal term, a Word document that describes your communication, your resources, all the things that go into your, not just the Gantt chart that is the schedule, but that you're writing that project plan for your best friend. You win the lottery, you're not coming to work, your best friend's going to come and take over the project. And I think that's what Tom was saying is, that's the level of detail that you need so that it can be transferred. And segueing to what Michelle was saying about the importance of the basis of estimate and actually maintaining the basis of estimate, that what happens on projects where I work is that, or actually, and other people confirm this too, that you have like a proposal team that writes a basis of estimate to justify the price. And then that never really gets fully fleshed out. What were the risks? What were the constraints? What were the considerations that went into that? Don't get passed along to the next stage. So you have CAMs in the development stage that just like inherited a pricing BOE, and then when they're interviewed in an integrated baseline review and an IBR about the achievability of the baseline, they're like, well, how did you come up with this? $10 million to get this widget done? Yeah, no, they handed that to me. Okay, those are all really flawed things. And these are the kinds of things that we got to learn during this excellent panel. I'll go on. So there was a question about the alignment between the WBS and the IMS, and I think everybody was like, what? What other choice is there? Everybody thought it was the foundation. You can't do anything, and and the benefit. Lisa was particularly emphatic about the benefit of the hierarchy that comes with that, with adhering to the WBS. You can see things rolled up and so forth.
Yeah, and I want to be more intelligent when I speak to this, so I'm going to just lightly touch on it. Maybe Barbara can school me. But my understanding is that the deletions of guidelines in 748 Rev E, 2 of them, I believe, are about hierarchy and roll up, because that was really a requirement that tools couldn't actually do it when those guidelines were initially written, but now it's inherent and doesn't even need to be stated.
I think that's exactly it. That is my understanding. And I know from doing surveillance that would guidelines, I want to say it was 24 and 25, but I'm not really that good that way. But yeah, and it was always like, yeah. Like there was really nothing to it because the tools actually wouldn't allow you to not do that. But you can mess it up in your schedule. Yeah.
I've seen in working the schema, the JSON, the DOE JSON schema, that there are several integration checks where for the DOE JSON schema, really the WBS is intended and worked with tool vendors to really be housed in the cost processor. Right. So your WBS originates, and that's its origin. And that's a single source of truth. Yeah. And then in order to integrate with your schedule, you really have to bring that WBS in somehow. And anytime you go from one point to another, there's potential room for error. So there is that opportunity that there is a disconnect between WBS and IMS, but it really should be all tied back to that WBS.
Well, I think that now with the enforced coding that comes with JSON, it's a forcing function to ensure that's there. I think we could make this a whole hour, Amber. My God,
I feel like we've only done 3 questions, and we're already at
another 2 or 3 minutes. I think. All right, I know you guys are on the edge of your seats listening to this, aren't you? It's so fascinating. John's questions were excellent, I have to say, but the panelists obviously rose to the occasion. But the question is about, can you have a schedule that passes all the health metrics but doesn't meet the male? Do you want to talk to that, Amber?
This was really, it was really emphatic. Everyone felt that, yes, of course. And it was fascinating to hear from Yancey and Lisa, but Yancey really, as an expert who goes and helps folks, he said, if you want me to pass all the greens, all of the metrics, you want me to make them all green, I can do that. If you want me to get an SRA that'll have a certain result, I can do that, right? He knows what to do and all of the ways and the art of scheduling to get the results that you want. But that's not the point of the schedule.
Right. And I always like to make that joke, maybe Yancey would put 9 women in a room for a month and get a baby, but the rest of us, we know that doesn't work that way. So he was teasing that you could make a schedule to get to Mars in 6 months. I mean, the schedule would say that, but there's no realism to it. And it would pass all the metrics. Everything would be green, full logic, all the no orphan tasks, all those sorts of things. Tom went on to say that, but he was more like, well, I think there might be something to having a schedule that does pass all the marks. He said that can be an indicator because that means that possibly a lot of discipline went into it. Yeah. A lot of time and caution went into it. It has the rigor, and he.
Yeah, and that my response was tied somewhat to that, and that perhaps on the baseline, you are able to get all green, which shows the rigor, shows that you put the controls and everything. But then in execution, it may just go off the rails because it really wasn't necessarily realistic.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Okay, so Barbara, this is what I'm going to do. I have one thing I want to share at the very end about I think it was the very last theme on culture. But if you want to pick one more from our long list here, and then I'll close out with my culture one.
Well, I think that question, maybe the question about performative versus predictive metrics. I know, John, we really like the bow wave one where you see the schedule work off trends and there's no way you can have the resources to meet the number of tasks, even if it's just a broad brush at it. That can be predictive. I think, did Yancey mention here that he wished he had invented the BEI? But he said that he and Tom were going to go off in the afternoon yesterday and they were going to invent a new metric, but I don't know if they've gotten to that yet.
We need to go ask them. Yeah, maybe get them on and then they can talk about their metric.
Yeah, maybe we'll be fresh, hot off the presses. But no, I think we've efficiently discussed what happened during the panel. So,
okay, well, closing out on the performative versus predictive, I think Michelle's comment was really key, that she said any metric. The question was, which metrics are more performative versus which metrics are more predictive? And Michelle said any metric can be predictive if you look at the trends on that metric. So that was really great. Okay, so I wanted to close it out on, it was really a John question. It was kind of an add-on. He was kind of riffing and just going through and thinking of new and exciting ways to talk through our discipline, and started to open it up to culture and open it up to how do we use the IMS? How do we work cohesively as a team? And I took out quotes. So I had some quotes that I wanted to say from the panel that really, to me, spoke to the types of culture I would hope we're trying to foster within the world of EVMS. and EVM. And that is from Lisa. She said, when you have integration and you have your cost and scheduling team, and you have your cost analyst and your scheduling analyst, or you have groups of people who work together, she said, that's your bud. That's your friend. That's the like professional friend. You want to work with them hand in hand and get to know them. And that collaboration, that professional collaboration, even if you don't have similar personalities, even if you don't have similar viewpoints, that's very important that we're all on the same team working towards the same mission. Similarly, Tom Poland said about integration and communication that the people who are on the team should be going to the same party. Like we should all be doing things together and having those touch points of communication. So that was really exciting. And then last is from a friend of mine that I was able to see while I'm here in California. He works for Aerospace Corp, and he said that he really loves his organization because it's a supportive organization. All the people he work with support each other and challenge each other for growth. And that was huge. So my ending statement was that whenever we're on a project, we're all one team, and that the missions that we are all working on are so, so important. And they're there. Typically, there's capital asset projects. They are there for the greater good. They're in alignment with government priorities. They're in alignment with what are the needs and the gaps that are seen across the nation. They're there because most likely the people want these types of results. And then in the world of NASA, which I learned on our JPL tour yesterday, is even in the NASA like original mission statement that the projects are there to benefit all humanity. I really think that's inspiring.
Okay, people, I believe we just had a soapbox moment.
My first soapbox moment. All right. So with that, that's all from
Let's Talk EVM. Thanks for listening.